Welcome to this week's episode of Windows Business Weekly, and today I'm going to talk about how to get your users and clients to embrace the cloud, so stay tuned. So after a week's break, I'm back in Prague and we're a sultry 31 degrees Celsius here with thunderstorms happening outside, so you might have some sound effects in the background today. But today I want to talk about the cloud and specifically about people's attitudes towards cloud computing. Now, the reason I want to talk about it is because I come across quite a lot of resistance to using basic cloud features, and I want to talk today specifically about synchronizing files to the cloud. Now, of course, cloud computing is a very wide subject, and we can talk about all sorts of different features and things that you can enable for your business clients or for people in your own organization. But a couple of incidences recently have led me to think about people are still quite wary of the cloud. It's not a new technology, and I think it's something that people just don't really understand how it works. So, of course, people fear what they don't know, what they don't understand. So I'll give you a couple of examples. A friend of mine was looking to buy a new notebook, but a very cheap notebook. Now, of course, one of the compromises that you make with a cheap notebook is that you have to have a very small hard drive, because if you want, 512 gigabytes, 1 terabyte of fast storage, then you're going to pay an awful lot. That doesn't usually come in a cheap notebook. Now, for me, it's not really very important for this person's particular needs, very basic needs. So basically using the internet, opening an Excel spreadsheet and doing some stuff with accounting software. That's it. Nothing very powerful is required for this particular user. But one of the requests was that, well, it needs to have a big hard drive because I've got a lot of data that I store. And my thought was, well, why do you need a big hard drive? If you're using the cloud, then you can just synchronize what it is that you're currently using and let Windows deal with managing what sits on your hard drive, what's in the cloud, and you need to never worry about backing up your data and how much space you've got on that disk. So the reaction to that was, of course, naturally, well, I don't use the cloud. It's like, okay, why not? And the answer was just simply, I don't want to. Now, part of me, of course, wants to enter into a debate with this person about, well, why you should or shouldn't be using the cloud, and what is it exactly that is kind of stopping you? What is the barrier there that makes you think, well, no, I don't want my data in the cloud? Now, I didn't carry on the conversation with that person, but I came across another case recently where somebody needed to access a file but wasn't able to do so because they didn't have access to their computer at the time. And I just happened to mention, well, you don't use the cloud, so if your files were synchronized to the cloud, then you would be able to access that file from your phone, and it wouldn't have been a problem. And again, I got a very negative reaction, kind of a back off. I'm not going to use the cloud, whatever the circumstances might be. I don't want to. It was very much a stop sign being put up in front of my face. And it was like, okay, so I can see there's a huge amount of resistance to this idea. But then in this particular incident, I got talking sometime after. I just closed the subject. I wasn't going to argue about it at that particular time. Then I got talking to this. This is completely unprofessional, by the way. These are just friends who ask me to do something or ask for some advice, for instance. It's not in a professional capacity whatsoever. But we just happened to be joking then about the cloud, because some other kind of technical problems came up, and I just said, well, if you were using the cloud, you could have done this. And we just started joking about it. And we were sitting actually with a group of friends, and somebody else started to explain how the cloud works. He was a little bit shocked about, you're not using the cloud. It's like a kind of prehistoric attitude towards technology. So there are a couple of things as this person started to explain how the cloud works, blah, 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 and it was quite interesting to watch the person's reaction. as he began to understand a little bit about the technology, he calmed down, of course, thinking, well, actually, maybe that is something that I could utilize. So I think with users and clients, whoever it is that you're dealing with, you need to really explain, if they want to listen, of course, not everybody's willing to listen, but if they're willing to listen, then you need to really explain to them the advantages and also to address their fears about what happens to their files in the cloud. Now, for the rest of this conversation, I'm going to talk specifically about OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. Of course, this isn't the only cloud solution in terms of synchronizing files. We've got things like iCloud, Google Drive, Dropbox, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. But I want to focus today, of course, on what is built into Windows. And the OneDrive client, whether you're using the personal consumer version of OneDrive or OneDrive for Business, that client is built into Windows 10, so you don't have to install anything. So that is the first thing. If you're using Windows 10, OneDrive and OneDrive for Business are already there. You can choose to use either or both of these products. So for instance, if you want to use the consumer version of OneDrive, if you sign up for it, you get 5 GB of free space, and if you need any more than that, then you can pay for it. If you want to use OneDrive for Business, you can either pay for it or subscribe as a completely separate service, or if you're using Office 365, if you've got a subscription, each user gets 1 TB of free data included with their subscription. So that's the first thing that you need to know about it. So what are some of the fears that people have? Well, of course, the first is that you're adding complexity to your life. Life is already complex enough without having to add another technology, which many users, of course, don't properly understand. So, does it add complexity to my life? Well, it is something that you're going to have to understand how it works, the concept of how it works. But once you've got over that, it doesn't really add any kind of difficulty. In fact, it should, of course, make your life easier. So this is the first thing, that okay, but everything in life that is worth doing requires a little bit of effort. But ultimately, it shouldn't actually make your life more complicated. So one of the questions that I see is, so what exactly am I going to upload to the cloud? Do I just upload all of my stuff, or do I need to choose what I upload? And the answer is you can choose. You can choose to either just upload everything, or you can choose, I'm going to upload this folder, and I'll leave everything else on my local hard drive. So you can choose. It's not necessarily an all or nothing adoption of this kind of technology. So what happens when my files go into the cloud? I've got data there that I don't want Microsoft or Apple seeing. So let's talk here about OneDrive for Business, because I want to be quite specific. So OneDrive for Business encrypts the data on disk, okay? It encrypts each individual file. It splits each file into chunks and spreads it into different data stores around the data center. So everything is encrypted and encrypted again. If the disks in Microsoft's data center, let's say, were stolen or were hacked or were, somehow physically accessed by somebody who shouldn't have access, your data is basically chopped up into tiny chunks, and in order to recreate an actual file that you could read, again, is next to impossible. Only you logging into OneDrive are able to actually do that. So the short answer is no. Microsoft or anybody else who doesn't have permission is unable to read your data. Now, of course, we hear about hacking attempts all of the time, not just attempts, of course, successful hacks, and people are concerned if they put their data into the cloud, no matter how well encrypted or protected it might be. We hear about these kinds of successful hacking attempts all the time. So how does that pan into how is it connected to what I've just explained? So Your data is protected from prying eyes, as long as nobody gets hold of your username and password. So this is where the technology, of course, can fall down a little bit. So if somebody is able to somehow get your username and password, then of course they can log into OneDrive as you and access your data. There's absolutely, no doubt about that whatsoever. So how would they get your username and password? So it might be, you might accidentally hand over your username and password because you've clicked on a link. It looks like Microsoft, but actually it's not Microsoft's site, and you've given away your username and password. It might be that your username and password is the same across every single online service that you use. It's been hacked somewhere else, so somebody is able to use that username and password to access your Microsoft account, for instance. And I can go on and on about different ways that potentially somebody could get hold of your credentials. But if you, of course, follow very simple security best practices, those things are very unlikely to happen. So it's all about being aware of how you might lose your credentials and educating your users about what they should look out for. Now, of course, there are things that you can do to make your username and password more secure. So I would recommend, if you are, of course, using an account to store any kind of sensitive information that you wouldn't want lost or compromised in any way, is that you should enable two-factor authentication on that account. So what that means is a hacker, if they were able to get your username and password, they need more than just that in order to log on. It's not enough just a username and password. So with two-factor authentication, it might be that you use an authentication app on your mobile to provide a code when you log in, or it might be that you have the system call you to verify that it's you to a specific number, or an SMS, you might have them send a code. Authentication app, of course, is the most secure way to do that. So that is another way that you can secure your account and make sure that your data is never compromised or lost. There are other technologies that Microsoft is gradually starting to roll out, like passwordless authentication. And of course, if you don't have a password to steal, it makes it much harder for somebody to compromise your accounts. So there are all sorts of things that you can do to make sure that your data stays secure in the cloud. Now, lots of people running small businesses or, just individual business people who don't necessarily have the technical resources at hand don't actually back up their data. Shock horror, it's 2019 and people still don't understand that they need to back up their data. Now, while you could argue that synchronizing your files to the cloud isn't technically a backup, it's pretty much as good as, and it's certainly better than not having any backup at all. So when you're using OneDrive for Business and you synchronize your files to the cloud, you can be sure that that data is being backed up in Microsoft's data center. So if one particular data store went down, your data can be restored from the other data stores where those chunks of all your files are stored, and they can be recreated. So you need to pretty much not worry about backing up your data if you're having everything synchronized, let's say, into Microsoft's data center. Some people are worried about that they're going to have to change the way they do things if they decide to use something like OneDrive. Well, Microsoft have a very cool feature in OneDrive called known folders. And what this allows you to do is to synchronize common folders like your desktop, your documents folder, pictures, things like this, and synchronize them to OneDrive, and then have them available on any device that you log into where you're logged into the OneDrive client. So this has a couple of advantages. The first is that it doesn't necessarily mean you have to change the location of your files. In the past, if you used something like OneDrive, you would have a special folder structure just for OneDrive. And that still exists, and you can use that if you like. But now you're able to use known folders and you can just use desktop documents and have them synchronized. You don't need to change anything that you do or the way that you do it. The other advantage, and it's a big advantage in my opinion, is not only are those files now being backed up in the cloud, but if you need to change the device that you're working on, maybe you buy a new PC or something goes wrong with that device, you can just log on and your files will be automatically synchronized back to your desktop, so that you don't need to worry about, okay, I've lost all my files, or I need to transfer all my files to a new computer. That's all going to be done automatically for you with the OneDrive client. Now, I've talked about keeping your files secure and safe so that only you can access them. But of course, OneDrive also allows you to share documents. So if you decide to share a folder or a file, you can do that. You can make it password protected, or you can share a public link that's valid for, I don't know, a certain period of time. So you also have the ability to share things that you are working on securely with other people, regardless of whether they are using OneDrive or not. And of course, all of your files you can also access from other devices. So you can access them from your phone or from a tablet or anything where the OneDrive client is available. Now, one of the great things about the OneDrive client, and I mentioned this earlier about limited disk space, especially on new tablets and notebooks, is that you can selectively choose what synchronizes from the cloud to your device. So you should think about the cloud as the single source of truth. This is the main copy of your files, and everything else is a synchronized copy. And you can decide, for instance, just to synchronize a particular folder or several folders to your notebook in order to save space. But you will actually be able to see everything, but it's just not necessarily synchronized. But when you open a file that isn't synchronized, you just have to wait a couple of seconds for it to download from the internet and it will be available for you to use. Or you can mark files that they should always be available. So you just say, yep, I want to make sure that file or that folder is always available on this device, so you don't have to worry about, will I have an internet connection or not. So also, of course, if you're using OneDrive for business, it enables all of the advanced collaboration features within Office. And I should also mention that OneDrive integrates very tightly with Office 365. That's not to say that other solutions don't integrate with Office, but of course, you've got all that native integration there with OneDrive. So OneDrive is simpler than ever to use. You don't necessarily need to change the way that you work. You don't need to choose what it is that you're going to upload, although you can if you want to, but you can just say, yep, upload everything. You can select what it is that you synchronize back to a device. So if you've got limited space, you don't have to synchronize everything. You can access files from mobile devices. If you decide to, you can share the data with other people securely, regardless of whether they're using OneDrive themselves. And everything is integrated into Office as well. And you've got the client built into Windows 10, so you don't need to install anything. And once you've understood basically how it works, and you've made sure that your user credentials for your Microsoft account or your work or school account are secure, you can be confident that your data is always available to you, is backed up, and is secure and can't be accessed by anybody else, but it is available whenever you need it, from wherever you need it. And you can share and collaborate with anybody that you need to. So if you're meeting resistance in your organization or with your clients, I recommend maybe making a short presentation about OneDrive or whatever synchronization technology it is that you are going to use, and try to allay people's fears. Explain to them how it works, what it's possible to do with this technology, how it will make their lives easier, and how it keeps their data secure. Okay, that's it for this week, and I hope you have a great week.